course, the global collapse in oil prices has led to what Mr. Teller was saying this morning, the twin shocks. So in terms of the collapse of oil prices, since 2014, we've seen approximately 63% decrease in average oil prices. For a country like Iraq, who is highly dependent on oil exports, in 2016, the percentage of government revenues coming from oil exports was 85%. For a country like this, for a country like Iraq, that is a large shock for the economy. This has also impacted oil production and oil investment plans. Oil companies in the room will probably know that during this period, the Ministry of Oil had entered into conversations with international oil companies, asking them to, let's say, minimize the amount of investment they put into Iraq at the time, while still maintaining at least the current levels of oil production and oil exports, due to the limited fiscal space that the government has. If we look at the economic performance or economic overview of Iraq over 2016, we saw a pickup in growth in 2016 at around 11%, driven mainly by the oil economy again. So GDP growth of non-oil GDP was actually negative, so we did not see a growth there. So this growth that we saw in 2016 was driven by the oil economy. Modest growth is forecast for the medium term up until 2020, assuming liberation of ISIS-occupied areas. During the same period, Iraq witnessed relatively low inflation at around 0.4%. Now, it is likely that this is an underestimate of the true inflation in the country because of the difficulty of measuring inflation in ISIS-occupied areas. As we understand now, with the liberation, more and more liberated areas coming online, the Central Statistics Organization is once again able, or starting to be able, to implement their surveys in these areas, and we're likely to see updates to these inflation figures. But given what we know now, we see inflation at an average of 2% in the medium term. If we look at the external sector, which is one part of the twin deficits that we were talking about this morning, the current account balance was in around 7% deficit in 2016. Again, this is due to the collapse in oil prices. However, we expect, as oil prices in the medium term and potentially in light of developments in the international oil market, OPEC deals and otherwise, to see this recovery in the current account, and a lot of the improvement and the shrinkage in the deficit will depend on government commitment to fiscal consolidation and implementation of fiscal consolidation measures that have been agreed with the government as part of the standby arrangement with the fund. In terms of official foreign exchange reserves, which is something that the media and everybody is always very interested in, although we've seen a $53 billion decrease at the end of 2015, Iraq is still at a comfortable level of foreign exchange reserves. We're about at $46.5 billion by the end of 2016. And we see this stabilizing at around 35%. So given the current circumstances and the economic challenges of the country, we will see further use of foreign exchange reserves in the country. However, we will see it stabilizing at around $35 billion, which is equivalent to 5 months of imports, which is still a comfortable level for a country like Iraq. Again, this is provided that the government is able to implement the fiscal consolidation measures that it has committed to. And also part of that will depend on the developments on the international oil prices. Looking at the other side of the twin deficit, which is the fiscal deficit, it has increased to 12% of GDP in 2016. This is because expenditures by the government was not able to shrink expenditures fast enough to meet the fast decrease in oil prices, the collapse in international oil prices, which is understandable. Similarly, public debt also increased, so it will peak around 63% of GDP by 2018. However, we will see that then subsequently declined to around 53% of GDP in 2021, so in the medium term. Now, the main goal of the standby arrangement, one of the main goals of the standby arrangement of the fund with the government, is to see both a stabilization, a path of sustainable debt for the country, for Iraq, as well as maintaining also a safe and comfortable level of international foreign currency reserves. And in order to do that, there has to be a combination of fiscal consolidation and other structural reforms in the economy to shift the expenditure profile towards productive investments. Talking about the financial sector, I won't say much because I think I'm sitting in a room of experts on this. The stress on state-owned banks continues in Iraq. The banking sector is dominated by the three large state-owned banks. Rashid, Rafidin, and TBI account for about 90% of the banking system's assets. So that's a large part of the banking system. We know that CBI and the Ministry of Finance are implementing a number of reforms in the financial sector, including the institution of the IBAN, instituting laws and follow-up and supervision with the banking sector on anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism, and so on. So there are efforts being implemented by the government to help stabilize and improve the banking sector. One of such reforms is the appointment of an external auditor for Rashid and Rafidin to do an audit of their 2014 financial statements. We expect this, the results of these audits to be done within this first quarter of 2017. Specifically on the standby arrangement, this was approved mid last year on July 7th, 2016. It's an arrangement that covers a 3-year period under which Iraq has access to around $5.3 billion to be dispersed over the period of 3 years. The first disbursement Iraq got was around $634 million upon approval in July. We had completed the first review of the standby arrangement in December 2016, upon which the second disbursement of the loan took place. We are currently undertaking the second review of the standby arrangement. We had a set of meetings with representatives of the government last month, and we'll continue our review this month with the representatives of the government on the sidelines of the spring meetings in Washington. Just a very brief outlook on where we see things going from here. This is my last slide. We see in 2017 Iraq's commitment, voiced its commitment to implement and adhere to the OPEC deal. And so that's of reducing exports production by 4% compared to the October 2016 level of oil production. And that's what we've programmed into our SBA. Starting in 2018 and going forward, we've assumed that the production levels will return to what they were at October of 2016. Iraqi oil prices are expected to pick up from what we've seen in 2016. The average was $36 a barrel for Iraq. And I must note here, the way we calculate Iraqi oil prices is we look at the IMF estimates, the World Economic Outlook, an average of Brent, West Texas, and Dubai prices. And we observe that Iraqi oil sells at a negative differential of about $7 a barrel, and that's how we reach our estimates. And we see that increasing gradually to around $50 a barrel in the medium term. Non-oil growth, while expected to be lower than oil growth, is expected to improve gradually as ISIS-liberated areas start to grow. And to echo the statements made this morning by Mr. Mustafa Al-Hiti, is that our program does not yet include estimates or projections for reconstruction of ISIS-liberated areas. And it's very important, I was glad to hear that work is underway to do a needs assessment. And it is important that this needs assessment is done thoroughly and the needs are identified as accurately as possible.
ensure the right kind of prioritization happens and the right kind of financing is secured for the reconstruction. This is just a resource for people who have further questions on our reports that are available online, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Great job. Thank you very much.